Welcome to the Pivot Mast Forklift Operator Training Course. During the next few minutes, we'll demonstrate how safe and efficient operation of a pivot mast forklift will help make you more productive. The best way to get the job done safely and efficiently is by knowing yourself, your machine, and workplace. It's vital that you and everyone who operates this forklift understands its operation. You must recognize situations that, if not avoided, could result in an accident, injuring yourself, someone working with you, or cause property or equipment damage. Although this presentation contains many valuable guidelines on efficient and safe operation, it should not be treated as the only source. The Pivot Mast Forklift Operator's Manual is your primary source of information. It was specifically prepared for your forklift. Every forklift operator must be trained in accordance to the rules provided by the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA. Your employer must ensure that each forklift operator is competent to operate a powered industrial truck safely, as demonstrated by the successful completion of the training and evaluation specified by OSHA. Operating a forklift without the proper training can cause serious injury or death to yourself or someone working with you. You'll see this safety alert symbol throughout this presentation, as well as in various manuals and on machine safety signs. It identifies important safety messages. If you see it, be alert to the possibility of serious injury or death. Always follow the instructions in the safety messages or other instructional machine signs. This symbol points out actions you should avoid to reduce the potential for serious injury or damage to the equipment. Landoll Corporation produces pivot mast forklifts in their modern, automated 400,000 square foot plant in Marysville, Kansas. From its humble beginnings as a small welding shop in 1963, Landoll Corporation is well into its fourth decade of commercial manufacturing, in addition to producing an outstanding line of heavy-duty specialized trailers and agricultural implements. Landoll expanded its production to include OEM contract manufacturing, material handling equipment such as the pivot mast, towing and recovery equipment, as well as a variety of products for the U.S. military. We have established a total quality management philosophy, which means that quality is built in as part of a constant ongoing process, not inspected in. Each process is documented and tightly controlled. Our quality mission statement says it all. Total customer satisfaction is our ultimate goal. Landoll is currently ISO 9001 certified. Landoll's full-time design engineering staff utilizes high-tech, three-dimensional Pro-E engineering design, development, and drawing systems to provide technological leadership and impressive design-to-market results. Landoll's highly automated facility produces every truck body, starting from the raw material and completing with the application of powder paint, one of the most durable paint processes available. Our process was the concept and innovative design of owner Don Landoll. Total customer satisfaction is what Landoll's processes and services are all about. Before we dive into this program, let's find out what is different about a pivot mast, very narrow aisle forklift. Pivot mast forklifts start where conventional, sit-down, counterbalanced trucks leave off. Its unique central front articulation allows the forks to turn 90 degrees to the right and side shift to the right or left. This allows the forklift to operate in aisles as narrow as 56 inches or 142 centimeters, maximizing warehouse space. In comparison, other very narrow aisle forklifts, such as a reach lift truck, need a minimum aisle of 8.5 feet wide. In addition to its very narrow aisle capability, pivot mast forklifts also handle long loads. For example, a load 12 feet long by 4 feet deep or 3.7 meters long by 1.2 meters deep can be easily picked up and unloaded using a pivot mast forklift. After the load is picked up, you can position the load lengthwise on the handy deck located along the right side of the truck. This keeps the load stable, and your visibility is unobstructed as you travel down narrow and crowded aisles to your destination. Most importantly, the pivot mast maintains full stability, traction, and control in all positions. These features combine to make the pivot mast one of the most versatile forklifts available. In many cases, you can use a pivot mast forklift to move material from a trailer truck to the warehouse shelf without the need for staging, making you more productive. Before you learn how to operate a pivot mast forklift, you need to be aware of the forklift's stability, lifting capacity, and load center ratings. Although pivot mast forklift trucks meet or exceed safety guidelines established by ASME or ANSI B56.1 and EEC 89/240, accidents can still happen. According to OSHA, forklift types of vehicles cause over 38,000 serious injuries and 107 fatalities annually. This is second only to vehicular highway accidents. Studies have shown that the leading cause of these accidents is the lack of understanding of how forklift trucks operate, especially when it comes to stability. If you don't understand the concepts of stability, you're likely to tip your pivot mast forklift truck, causing serious injury or death. The concepts concerning stability are actually quite simple. Unlike an automobile which has 4 points of suspension, pivot mast forklift trucks operate on a 3-point suspension, 2 on the front axle, and the third at the center point of the rear axle. The front axle also forms the fulcrum, which is the balance point between the load and the pivot mast forklift. If the truck tips forward, it pivots around the fulcrum. If you draw an imaginary line between the 3 points of suspension, a triangle called the stability triangle is formed. The center of gravity, an imaginary point at which all of the truck's weight is concentrated, is inside of the stability triangle when the truck is unloaded and at rest. Its location is determined by a combination of the weight of the truck's body, counterweight, position of the mast, and load. When you pivot the mast to the right, the center of gravity moves to the right. When the center of gravity moves outside of the stability triangle, the forklift is unstable and could tip over. The center of gravity could shift if the load exceeds the rated capacity listed on the identification plate. The load center of the load exceeds the load center dimensions listed on the identification plate. You pivot and side shift an excessively heavy load to the extreme right. You do not seat the forks fully into the pallet, called tip loading. You take a corner too fast with the truck unloaded or loaded. You drive with the load raised. The load is not distributed properly. Always keep the heavier items near the load backrest. You drive across a grade. You drive on a grade with the load facing downhill. You use a battery that weighs less or more than the weight range listed on the identification plate, or you brake aggressively or turn with the load elevated. The battery and truck chassis become the counterweight that helps keep the center of gravity within the stability triangle. For this reason, make sure the weight of the battery is no less than the minimum and no more than the maximum service weight listed on the identification plate. Your instructor will show you where the identification plate is located on your pivot mast forklift. When you're picking up a load, you need to know how much weight your forklift can safely lift to keep it stable. This weight, known as the rated capacity, is also listed on the identification plate. The rated capacity varies for each load and depends on the horizontal and vertical load centers, the height you plan to lift the load, the amount of mast tilt, and any attachments used. When the weight of a load is evenly distributed, its load center, or center of gravity of the load, is right in the middle, halfway between the front and back and halfway between the top and bottom. So a load that is 48 inches long by 48 inches high, or 122 centimeters long by 122 centimeters high, has a load center 24 inches, or 61 centimeters, from the top and back. Your pivot mast forklift is rated to handle loads that have up to 24-inch load centers. Look carefully at the identification plate. You'll notice that the A dimension shows a 24-inch load center from the load backrest and dimension B shows a 24-inch load center from the top of the forks. Make sure your loads stay within these parameters. A load that is too long or high is likely to cause your forklift to tip over. If the load is not tight against the load backrest, the effective load center can exceed the maximum limit, causing the truck to tip. Also, keep the heaviest part of the load closest to the load backrest. When you raise the mast, the rated capacity of your truck decreases. The identification plate lists the rated capacity at various heights. The amount of forward and rearward tilt you should use is governed by the application. When you travel with the truck loaded, you should tilt the mast rearward as well as keep the load low. This will help stabilize loads with an uneven weight distribution. When you load at high elevations, only tilt the load back far enough to seat it against the load backrest. Remember that your pivot mast forklift should never be modified in any manner. Modifications will void the warranty and can cause serious injury or death. Only options and attachments approved by Landoll Corporation may be installed on the truck. Keep in mind that approved options and attachments may affect the rated capacity and load center. In addition to the rated capacity, you must determine the weight of the load before you attempt to lift it with your pivot mast forklift. The weight should be listed on the pallet wrapper, container, or bill of lading. Or you can determine the weight by multiplying the weight of each container by the number of containers stacked on a pallet. Each container should have its weight marked on it. If you cannot determine the weight, ask your supervisor. In addition to stability, you need to be aware of special situations in your workplace to avoid forklift accidents. Even if you work in the same area each day, there could be changes that could affect your safety, such as contractors doing maintenance, wet areas, or overhead repair work. Be on the defensive for anything that might present a hazard. Other situations that could present special operating conditions include potholes, pedestrian traffic, narrow aisleways, other equipment or vehicles operated in the area, overhead obstructions, poor lighting, making it hard to see hazards, and wet, oily, or rough terrain. Remember, do not block electrical panels, fire exits, emergency stop buttons, or aisleways with your pivot mast forklift or materials you're moving. Let's focus on special hazards you can encounter when you load or unload a transport vehicle, such as a truck or railroad car. We'll discuss some rules you should follow when you use dock boards. Dock boards help to even out the transition between a loading dock and transport vehicle. They're designed so that one end contacts the dock or loading platform and the other end contacts the transport vehicle. Handholds or other effective means are provided on portable dock boards to allow you to handle them safely. Where possible, fork loops or lugs are provided for handling by fork trucks. When you load or unload a transport vehicle, the dock board must be locked in place to prevent it from rocking or sliding. Dock boards have a high-friction surface designed to reduce the possibility of people or trucks slipping. Never exceed the carrying capacity marked on portable or powered dock boards. Remember these simple rules when you load and unload transport vehicles. Before you load or unload a highway truck, trailer, or railroad car, make sure it doesn't move unintentionally. Set the brakes and chock the wheels. If a semi-trailer is not coupled to a tractor, make sure that all four corners are supported to prevent upending or corner dipping. Maintain a safe distance from the edge of ramps, platforms, or other similar working surfaces. And don't move railroad cars or trailers with a pivot mast forklift. Standard and optional warning devices are provided on pivot mast forklifts to warn other people that you're approaching. A horn is provided as standard equipment. Sound the horn as you approach an intersection. Stop and look for other vehicles or pedestrians and proceed with caution. Other optional warning devices such as an amber overhead warning light, a flashing backup light, a rear safety light package, or a beeping or talking backup alarm may also be installed. Make sure they are in working order before you start work each day. Now let's turn our attention to atmospheric, electrical, or chemical types of hazardous environments you might encounter in your workplace. Given the right circumstances, atmospheric conditions can be explosive or flammable. For example, if gasoline or kerosene is stored in the area, the vapors they produce can cause an explosion or start a fire. Make sure your pivot mast forklift is properly equipped for the conditions expected in your workplace. Check with your supervisor if you're in doubt. The standard pivot mast forklift meets the criteria for Type E as described in Underwriters Laboratory 583 standard. You should know the chemical characteristics of the substances you're moving. In case of an accident, you would handle stable, reactive, or flammable substances differently. For example, if you puncture a drum that contains flammable material, you need to turn off all sources of ignition and contact the proper authorities. In this section of the Pivot Mast Forklift Operators Training course, you learned about need for proper training before you operate a pivot mast forklift. In addition, you learned that the stability triangle, rated capacity, load centers, fork height, mast tilt, and accessories all affect the stability of your forklift. You also learned about workplace conditions that you should be aware of when you use your pivot mast forklift. Be on the alert for changing conditions and take the necessary precautions when you load and unload transport vehicles. Finally, you learned that atmospheric, electrical, and chemical environmental hazards could affect the type of pivot mast forklift you use and how you use it. Your instructor will discuss the stability and general operating cautions presented in this program and provide additional workplace rules. Listen carefully. Your safety is important to a lot of people. Welcome back to the Pivot Mast Forklift Operator Training course. This portion of the course will help you identify the operator controls and indicators found on a pivot mast forklift truck, demonstrate basic operating techniques with and without a load, and check vital pivot mast forklift systems before you start work every day. Now that we've learned about stability, rated capacity, and workplace conditions, let's take a look at the controls and indicators of your pivot mast forklift. Understanding the controls and indicators and knowing where they are is as important as understanding stability. Although all forklift trucks use controls that function according to the American Society of Mechanical Engineers, or ASME, or the Industrial Truck Association, or ITA, there are significant differences in performance from one to the next. You will find all of the operating controls for your pivot mast forklift inside the cab, and that's where they should be operated from. Never try starting the forklift while standing outside the cab, and never try operating any of the hydraulic controls while standing outside the cab. The forward and reverse motion of your pivot mast forklift is controlled by the direction lever. Pushing it away from you will direct the forklift to move forward when the accelerator pedal is pressed. Pulling the direction lever toward you will direct the forklift to move backward when the accelerator pedal is pressed. The accelerator pedal starts the truck in motion and controls how fast it travels. Press the pedal down to start the truck moving in the direction you selected. The closer you press the accelerator pedal to the floor, the faster the forklift moves. The brake pedal is used to stop the truck. Always use your right foot to brake. And never steer with the brake set and the truck has come to a full stop. For safety reasons, whenever you are operating the forklift, keep your right foot on the accelerator pedal when you are traveling or brake when you are stopping. Always keep your left foot on the floor of the cab. Your pivot mast forklift will brake by plugging. If you release the accelerator pedal, change direction with the direction lever, and press the accelerator pedal again. The motor will come to a smooth stop and then reverse direction. This process is automatic. Do not press the brake pedal. Brake by plugging is the method of choice to stop the truck. Use the brake pedal for emergency braking. To the left of the steering column is the handbrake. Pull it toward you to engage it and push it away from you to release it. The truck will not respond to the accelerator pedal unless you push the handbrake forward all the way. Hold the steering knob with your left hand to control the steering wheel. Turn the steering wheel clockwise to make a right turn and counterclockwise to make a left turn. The key switch is two-position. Turn it clockwise to the on position to energize the forklift controls, and turn it counterclockwise to the off position to deactivate all forklift controls. A seat switch controls the safety return to off feature of the motor controller. When you get on the forklift and the direction lever is not in the neutral position, this feature will issue an error code as soon as you turn the key switch on. Since the error code is different in some pivot mast forklifts, your instructor will show you how it appears on your pivot mast forklift. Never place items under the seat. They could prevent the seat switch from operating correctly. Your pivot mast forklift has an hour meter and dash display that help indicate the current status of operation. The hour meter provides a record of operating time in hours. Some hour meters work differently. Your instructor will explain the operation of the hour meter on your pivot mast forklift. The dash display indicates the battery charge as % of full charge. 100 indicates a fully charged battery. This reading may fluctuate when you first turn the key switch on, but the readings will settle down after the forklift is in operation. If the battery charge is less than a preset amount, the lift, tilt, side shift, and pivot controls will not function. If you see a number preceded by a minus sign, this is a service code. Check your operator's manual for the explanation. If you cannot resolve the problem yourself, check with your supervisor. Your pivot mast forklift provides two multifunction levers that control the mast. The lift tilt control lever controls the lift and fork tilt motion, and the pivot side shift control lever controls the pivot and side shift motion of the forks. Moving the lift tilt lever straight back raises the forks. Moving the lever straight forward lowers the forks. Moving the lever straight to the right tilts the mast forward. Moving the lever straight to the left tilts the mast backward. Moving the lever at a diagonal will combine the two functions to either side. For example, if you move the lever forward and diagonally to the right, the forks will lower and tilt forward at the same time. To review the other combined functions of the lift-tilt lever, see your pivot mast operator's manual. Note a mast tilting reference point is provided to help you determine when the mast is perpendicular to the ground. A pivot side shift control lever controls the pivot and side shift action of the mast. Moving the lever straight back pivots the forks counterclockwise or towards the operator. Moving the lever straight forward pivots the forks clockwise or away from the operator. Moving the lever straight to the right side shifts the mast to the right. Moving the lever straight to the left side shifts the mast to the left. Moving the lever at a diagonal will combine the two functions to either side. For example, if you move the lever forward and diagonally to the right, the forks will pivot clockwise and shift to the right. Before we show you how to operate your pivot mast forklift, we want to point out the safety features. Some of them are built into the design of the truck, and some are the responsibility of the operator to be aware of and use. Because we come in all shapes and sizes, your pivot mast forklift is equipped with an adjustable seat. The controls won't do you much good if you can't reach them. There's also a seat belt that must be worn every time the forklift is operated. The steering column also tilts. Your instructor will demonstrate how to adjust the steering tilt on your pivot mast forklift. An overhead guard is provided to protect you from falling objects. A horn is standard equipment on all pivot mast forklifts. Use it when you're approaching an intersection or at other times when it's necessary to warn others you're approaching. And a headlight switch controls the operation of the headlights mounted on the overhead guard. If you look around the truck, You will see clearly printed decals that are precautions about the safe operation of the forklift. Read and understand these precautions before you begin operation. One of the reasons for creating this training course is to explain the importance of basic operating skills. These basic skills must be exercised every time you operate your pivot mast forklift, because believe it or not, most mishaps occur doing the simplest things. The first thing you should do as a new operator is read the operator's manual carefully. One of the fundamentals of safe operation is knowing how to properly enter the cab. Always enter the cab from the left side of the truck, and hold on to the hip restraint and overhead guard as you step up on the cab. Once you are inside the cab, ease yourself into the seat and make any necessary operator comfort adjustments, such as the seat and steering tilt. Fasten your seat belt. Make sure the handbrake is engaged and all accessories, such as the headlights, are turned off. Check the direction lever to make sure it is set to neutral. With both feet on the floor of the cab, turn the key switch on. Check the dash display to make sure no service codes are listed. Set the direction lever for the direction of travel. Use the lift lever to raise the forks 4 to 6 inches or 10 to 15 centimeters off the ground, and use the tilt lever to tilt the mast all the way back. This is the recommended position when you travel from one place to the next. Release the handbrake. Grasp the steering knob firmly with your left hand and turn the steering wheel in the direction you want to travel. Make sure the way is clear and gently press the accelerator pedal with your right foot. If your truck was parked on an incline in an emergency, release the brake and press the accelerator pedal simultaneously to avoid reverse motion as you get going again. Remember, always look in the direction you will travel before you begin to drive the forklift. If you forget, serious equipment damage, personal injury, or death can result. Only operate your truck from the operator's seat with your seatbelt fastened. If you get out of your seat while the truck is moving, the seat switch opens, causing the truck to freewheel and lose control. Do not place any part of your body outside the vehicle. Never carry passengers. Practice starting, stopping, and turning before you attempt to pick up and transport a load. Always try to operate your forklift as smoothly as possible. Rapid starts and stops can cause you to lose control and can also cause premature wear and damage to your truck. Braking by plugging is the preferred method to stop your pivot mast forklift. Whenever possible, simply release the accelerator pedal, change direction with the direction lever, and press the accelerator pedal again. The motor will come to a smooth stop and then reverse direction. This process is automatic. Do not press the brake pedal. Brake by plugging is the method of choice to stop the truck. Only use the brake pedal in an emergency. Remember that if you're carrying a load, an emergency stop may cause the load to dislodge. Always try to brake in a smooth, controlled manner. Get the feel of turning your forklift at an intersection or making a U-turn in a wide aisle. Never accelerate while you are turning, or you can lose control of your pivot mast forklift. Remember that making an improper turn can cause your forklift to tip, even if you aren't carrying a load. Sound your horn as you reach the intersection to warn pedestrians and other equipment operators you're approaching. And remember to yield them the right of way. You've reached your destination and need to park. Before you park the vehicle, make sure the parked truck will not cause an obstruction or safety hazard, and make sure the forklift is clear of fire exits, fire equipment, and stairways, and the truck is not left unattended on an incline. If the truck is inoperative and you must leave it parked on an incline, apply the handbrake, remove the key, and securely block the wheels. After you park the forklift properly, you're ready to exit the vehicle. First, apply the handbrake. Place the direction lever in neutral. If you leave the truck unattended, fully lower the mast and tilt the forks forward. Turn off all accessories and turn off and remove the key. Unfasten your seatbelt and use the hip restraint, overhead guard, and step to exit the vehicle. Now that you understand the basic operating procedures, let's try picking up a load and storing it. First, you must plan your activities. Examine the workplace conditions as we mentioned in the first segment. Are the aisles where you will be picking up and storing the load clear of obstructions? Are there other people or machines operating in the area? Do you know how much the load weighs? Do you have the right machine? In general, a pivot mast P30 forklift can handle a rated capacity of 3,000 pounds or 1,360 kilograms, and a pivot mast P40 forklift can handle a rated capacity of 4,000 pounds or 1,814 kilograms. Remember that the rated capacity decreases as you raise the load off the ground or you use any attachments. Check the identification plate. Either of these trucks can work in an aisle with a clear width as narrow as 56 inches or 142 centimeters. Clear aisle width means width of the aisle without projections, such as the rack uprights and any overhang of material on the racks. Material stored on racks should not protrude in the clear aisle, or your pivot mast forklift may catch on it. Also, the minimum aisle width can vary depending upon the application. Check with your supervisor. Next, lift the forks a few inches off the ground and set the forks so you can handle the load efficiently. Measure the opening between the end stringers of the pallet. Lift the fork locks up, and being careful not to pinch your fingers, adjust the spacing between the forks so the distance between them is half of the distance between the end stringers of the pallet. Make sure the forks are seated in a carriage notch and equidistant from the ends of the carriage, and press the fork locks down, making sure they are engaged and locked. Finally, and perhaps the most important, take a moment to check all pivot mast forklift systems. OSHA requires you to conduct this inspection before the start of each shift. This is true even if you're taking over for a coworker. Never assume that they have performed the daily checks. Work together as a team to keep the truck in peak operating condition. Landoll Corporation provides an easy-to-use form to guide you through the inspection. Just indicate whether the item inspected is okay or if it needs attention. Get a copy of the checklist from your supervisor or make a copy of the list that is provided in your Pivot Mast Operator's Manual. Your instructor will help you check out your truck after the completion of this portion of the video program. Use a piece of cardboard or wood to check for hydraulic fluid leaks. Never use your bare hands. Remember to wear safety glasses. Hydraulic oil can be under very high pressure. A pinhole leak is not easily seen, and if it pierces your skin can cause gangrene and possibly death if not treated immediately by a physician familiar with this type of injury. Check the hydraulic hoses for signs of cracking, abrasion, or cuts, and check for other leaks, such as battery or brake fluid. Inspect the forks, especially the condition of the heel and top clip retaining pin, for signs of cracks or other damage. Check each tire for abrasion and signs of abnormal wear. Check for missing or damaged mast chains and stops, finger guards, load backrest, and overhead guard. Check for and replace any missing or damaged machine signs. Make sure the identification plate is attached and the stated information matches the model, serial number, rated capacity, and attachments used with this forklift. Check the battery electrolyte level and the hydraulic, transmission, and brake fluid level. Make sure the seatbelt and battery restraint system are securely fastened. With the truck operating, check all operator controls, such as the steering, lift, tilt, side shift, pivot, direction lever, and brake for proper and smooth operation. And check all indicators to make sure they are functioning and show normal readings. One final point. Stay out of the service enclosure. There are no operator maintenance points inside. After you complete your inspection, give the checklist to your supervisor and make sure you tell them about any problems you found. If any problem with the forklift is found during your shift, shut it down immediately and tell your supervisor. Now that you're familiar with the operation of the pivot mast forklift, it's time to learn how to pick up a load. We will not describe the direction you need to move the control levers during the following procedure, so you can focus on the action. See your pivot mast operator's manual for the necessary control lever positions. If the forks or load jam or catch during a stacking operation, do not attempt to free them by reaching through the mast. Failure to follow this guideline can cause serious injury or death. As you approach the load, make sure the forks are level and raise them to the appropriate height as you approach the rack opening. Begin to pivot the mast clockwise to approximately 45 degrees and shift fully to the left. With the truck 2 to 4 inches or 5 to 10 centimeters from the rack and straight or angled slightly towards the rack, creep forward until the tip of the right fork is even with the center of the pallet. Pivot the mast further clockwise as you creep forward. Continue to creep forward and pivot the mast until it is square with the stack and the forks are centered under the load. Stop the truck and side shift the mast to the right so the forks are fully inserted in the load. Raise the forks until the load is approximately 2 inches or 5 centimeters off the rack. Tilt the load slightly to the rear. Shift the load fully to the left. Pivot the load counterclockwise as you start to travel slowly in reverse. Continue to pivot the load as you travel backwards. After the load clears the far corner of the opening, pivot it counterclockwise and side shift to the right to the full forward position centered to the truck. Lower the load and tilt it completely backwards so the forks are 4 to 6 inches or 10 to 15 centimeters above the floor, and slowly drive to the next location using the safety rules previously stated. Here are some tips to follow when you travel from the pickup point to the spot you will store the load. Let's start with general precautions. Do not apply the brakes abruptly with the load raised or tilted forward. If you stop abruptly, the load may dislodge from the forks, causing serious injury or death. Remember to always use brake by plugging when possible. Remember, if you speed, you might not have time to stop. The stopping distance is longer when you're carrying a load. Keep at least 3 machine lengths between you and the next machine. Also, slow down when you are turning. The change in center of gravity when you turn a corner is magnified when you're carrying a load. Make sure forks are set so the spacing between them is equal to 1/2 the opening between the end stringers on the pallet. Never handle unstable or loosely stacked loads. Use caution when you handle long, high, or wide loads. Never allow anyone to stand beneath or pass under the mast. Never use the forklift to elevate anyone. If the mast continues to raise after the control lever is released, turn off the key switch and notify your supervisor. Make sure you insert forks fully into the pallet. Never tip load by only inserting tips of the forks into the load. Tip loading can cause the forklift to tip over. Slow down before you turn a corner. Taking a corner too fast can cause the forklift to tip. Drive with the load 4 to 6 inches or 10 to 15 centimeters off the floor, unless you are picking up or storing a load. Keep the heavier items near the load backrest or the truck may tip. Sound your horn as you approach a blind corner. When you approach an intersection, stop, sound your horn, and yield the right-of-way to pedestrians and other machine operators. Never drive across a grade or with the load facing downhill. Doing so can cause the forklift to tip. If you need to travel on an incline, keep these tips in mind. Make sure the grade is 12% or less with a loaded pivot mast forklift, and 20% or less if you're not carrying a load. Always keep the load pointed uphill, whether you are going up or down the incline. If your vision is obscured, arrange for a spotter to guide you. If you are not carrying a load, travel with the forks facing uphill when you are going up the incline, and face the forks downhill when you are traveling down an incline. Whether the truck is loaded or not, Use the foot brake to maintain control before it builds up momentum. As the grade changes at the top or bottom of a ramp, raise the forks to avoid damage to the forks or load. Lower the forks to traveling height when you clear the ramp. Never use a battery that weighs less or more than the weight range listed on the identification plate. Since the battery is part of the counterweight, too much or too little battery weight can cause the truck to tip. Make sure the load center and weight of the load does not exceed the capacity and load center rating stated on the truck's identification plate. Check with your supervisor if the load center exceeds the maximum rating for your truck. Loading the truck beyond its rated capacity can cause axles to break, the truck to tip over, and the load to fall. If you sense that the truck is going to tip over, lean away from the direction the truck is tipping. Hold onto the steering wheel, brace your feet, and don't jump. Now you're ready to stack the load. Remember, if the forks or load jam or catch during a stacking operation, do not attempt to free them by reaching through the mast. Failure to follow this guideline can cause serious injury or death. Approach the rack, making sure the load is level, and raise the load to the appropriate height. With the truck 2 to 4 inches or 5 to 10 centimeters from the rack and straight or angled slightly, creep forward until the right forward corner of the load is even with the center of the load opening. Raise the load until the bottom is approximately 2 inches or 5 centimeters off the rack. Side shift the mast fully to the left and pivot the mast clockwise as you creep forward. Continue to creep forward and pivot the mast until it is square with the stack. Stop the truck and side shift the mast to the right. Lower the forks until the load sits firmly on the stack. Continue to lower the forks until they no longer support the load. Make sure you don't lower the forks too far. If the forks are lowered too far, you can damage the mast, rack, or other containers on the rack. This may cause serious injury or death. Shift the mast fully to the left. Pivot the mast counterclockwise as you start to travel slowly in reverse. Continue to pivot the mast as you travel backwards. After the right fork clears the rack, pivot the mast counterclockwise and shift to the full forward position centered to the truck. Lower the mast and tilt it completely backwards so the forks are 4 to 6 inches or 10 to 15 centimeters above the floor, and slowly drive to the next location using the safety rules previously stated. If you need to pick a long load, remember your pivot mast must be equipped with a long load deck. Note that long loads are inherently less stable and should be handled with additional care. Move the load slowly and maintain a stable load condition. Position the pivot mast parallel to the long load approximately 8 to 10 inches or 20 to 25 centimeters from the opposite side of the aisle, but not more than 36 inches or 91 centimeters from the load face in wide aisles. Stop the truck with the tips of the forks even with the center of the load. Turn the steering wheel clockwise and angle it toward the load center. Pivot the mast to the right and shift the mast to the left as you drive forward and raise the forks to a position under the load center. Continue to pivot and shift the mast as you drive forward to position the forks under the load center and snug the load against the load backrest. Lift and tilt the load to clear the floor or the rack storage position. For loads on the floor or below deck level, move the truck in reverse direction while you turn the steering wheel clockwise. Pivot and shift the mast as needed to keep the load centered with the storage opening as you move the truck in reverse. When the load is clear of the load opening, raise the load above deck level. Shift and pivot to position the load parallel to the deck. Lower the load to rest on the forks and the deck load supports. For loads in a rack above deck level, pivot and shift the load to the left, keeping the load centered with the storage opening. Pivot the right end of the load clear of the rack as you shift to the left and move the truck in reverse. When the load is clear of the load opening, shift and pivot to position the load parallel to the deck. Lower the load to rest on the forks and the deck load supports. Continue to move the truck in reverse as you steer clockwise and become straight in the aisle. Stop and move the shift lever to forward and proceed forward. At the end of the day, you should perform the necessary battery maintenance, including charging or changing the batteries. Change and charge batteries in accordance with ANSI NFPA 505, and always follow the instructions provided with the charger. Before you exit the truck, disconnect the battery plug. Batteries produce explosive gases during operation and charging. Keep your pivot mast forklift in a designated area while you're charging or changing the batteries. The area must be properly ventilated to remove the gases produced while it's charging. Keep all sparks, arcs, and lighted tobacco away from the batteries. Failure to do this can cause serious injury or death. Make sure top of batteries are clean and dry before you remove the cell caps. Check the electrolyte levels and top off with distilled water after the batteries are completely charged. Add sufficient amount of distilled water to keep the acid level visible. Many types of cells have an indicator rib or similar projection above the separator guard. Do not fill above this marker. Refer to manufacturer's instructions. Check the charger cable and plug for frayed insulation and broken connectors, and connect it to the battery plug. Make sure you don't accidentally connect the charger to the truck cable, or you'll damage the forklift. When the batteries are fully charged, disconnect the charger cable, unlatch the battery cover, close it, and swing the seat to the normal position, and reconnect the battery cable to the truck cable. If you need to change the battery, park your pivot mast forklift in the battery bay. Latch the battery cover in the open position and disconnect the battery cable. Make sure you are using a hoist that has sufficient capacity to lift the battery and lift the battery out of the truck. Orient the new battery so the connector faces towards the dash panel and carefully lower it into place. Connect the cable and return the seat to the normal position. This training course introduced you to the pivot mast forklift, discussed the importance of the stability triangle, demonstrated the use of operator controls and indicators, and finally provided step-by-step instruction for storing and retrieving loads with your forklift and performing basic battery maintenance. Your instructor will discuss the basic operation of your pivot mast forklift and demonstrate how you will be using it in your workplace. After the demonstration, you will have time to learn the basics and apply them to workplace situations. After you're comfortable using the pivot mast forklift, your instructor will ask you to perform some tasks that you would normally be expected to do in everyday situations. Good luck.